let's talk a little bit about the Lojong or mind training slogans. The first set is actually really important, but they all come from Atisha Dipankara Srijnana, who was a master in what's known as the Kadampa school of Tibetan Buddhism. So he lived from 982 to approximately 1054. So during this time, he was well known for many wonderful texts, but most importantly, in my opinion, he systematized the greater vehicle, the Mahayana teachings, into 59 mind training slogans. Prior to Atisha, these teachings were available, but they were held very close to the chest by the monastic community. They were not actually accessible to lay practitioners like you and me. But he saw how relevant they are to the lay community and made them accessible to the world at large through this beautiful act of shrinking in a lot of teachings around emptiness and compassion into something that's, I don't want to say bite-sized because each of them are quite profound and compact, but very tangible, very applicable for our day-to-day life. So he's joining what we would call the absolute teachings around emptiness, and the relative teachings, the teachings on bodhicitta. We'll get more into this concept later on, but I want to just define it right off the bat because it is such a fuel for how we engage with other people in the world. Bodhi is a term that can be translated as open or awake. Chitta is heart, mind. The idea here being that we are keeping an open heart and mind to the world around us. So on a relative level, that often will mean that we manifest with compassion, with a sense of loving kindness. And these are really important teachings that help us connect with others and not only be of benefit to ourselves, but to everyone we encounter. So the first section of these really are what are known as the preliminaries. Often in traditional Tibetan Buddhist teachings, we will get into preliminaries before we move on to a main text. The preliminaries here are, so slogan 1 is first train in the preliminaries. That's the entirety of the slogan. But what those are is 1, our own human life, which is very precious, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And 2, reality of impermanence and death, which is not a great thing to open a whole series with, but here you go. This is part of our great reality, that death comes without warning, that impermanence is real. The third is the entrapment of karma, which I always think is a very funny way of putting it, but the idea that we reap what we sow. So if we don't practice, if we live a very confused or an angry life, we will be surrounded by confusion and anger. If we do work with our mind, we could actually begin to wake up and not do that, maybe even work with our mind to the extent that we are sowing seeds for virtue, for a sense of openness and compassion in our life. And then 4, the intensity of samsara, which is the suffering of change, the all-pervasive suffering. All of this we are going to get into in 2 weeks' time. The third and fourth of these, karma and the aspects of what are known as samsara, the cycle of suffering, will be covered in the next video. But I want to focus on, I called this the great matter of life and death. It's not even my term at all. It's actually a Zen saying, the great matter of life and death. Atisha clearly did not invent death. He did not even make it a part of Buddhist philosophy. It's always been there. There is a story that dates back actually to the time of the Buddha, where he was still Siddhartha Gautama. He was known as this young prince-like figure, and he lived an incredibly sheltered existence. He was not exposed to things like sickness and aging and death. But when he was told he was going to be ruling the kingdom or the fiefdom, however we want to think about it, that his father currently ruled, he said, I need to go out and see what people are doing. And because he was so concerned that his son would end up in this spiritual life, the father, the king or kingly person, arranged for there to be no suffering when Siddhartha left the palace walls. He said there's no way that anyone can ever intimidate this kid into actually realizing that there's suffering in the world. We don't want him to know that there's suffering. If he knows that there's suffering, he's going to go become a spiritual person. He's not going to want to inherit the family business of running this kingdom. We got to make sure. And so Siddhartha takes off in this chariot, goes into town, sort of doing these loops, and lo and behold, the chariot driver takes one particular turn, and it's inevitable. I mean, it's just the way that life works. Siddhartha was exposed the moment he left his home to aging, sickness, death, and at some point, even the image of an ascetic. He saw a holy person, and he was so inspired that that person was devoting their life to actually overcoming suffering that he himself, having been exposed to suffering, was like, yeah, I've got to make it. I've got to go and do the same thing. And that's actually the beginning of the story of the Buddha, where he was inspired to leave his home, his upbringing, his riches, and go pursue a spiritual path. Whether, there's some scholars out there who are like, really, was he that cloistered, 2,600 years ago? Was he that, like, what, giant tower even existed that he could have been, so sheltered from aging, sickness, and death? I don't know. But I do understand that sense that, like, oh, once we have a visceral understanding of impermanence and death, it can be a true motivating factor on our spiritual journey. So that was certainly the case for the Buddha. Probably is the case for you. Maybe it's a big death. Maybe there was someone in your life who passed away. Maybe it was your own experience of coming close to death. Maybe it's the little deaths in our life, which don't always feel so little, like the death of a relationship, the death of a job, the death of a dream, a house, a whatever it might be. There's lots of moments where we're like, wow, my life feels really thrown up in the air. And we actually walk away inspired to work with our mind and heart because we don't know what else to do. So even this great matter of life and death can actually, well, I'll talk about death with a capital D, even these quote unquote little deaths, these deaths that are natural transition points in our life, the truth of impermanence, actually help wake us up and motivate us on the spiritual path. So the great matter of birth and death, or the great matter of life and death, encountering it, coming to terms with it, resolving it, these have always been at the heart of the Buddhist path. And I keep using this term, the great matter. It's commonly associated with the teachings of the Zen master Dogen. And Dogen, the question of birth and death, or life and death, has been called this great matter. Often in Japanese monasteries that stem from that tradition, there's a chant, "Great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Wake up each one. Don't waste this life." And I love that because there is this connection of why do we contemplate death? Because it makes us realize that death comes without warning. And our role here is to wake up and try to be of most benefit to ourselves and others in the short time that we do have, i.e. we can actually appreciate and cherish this precious life. So obviously we live in a society that resists this truth. There's a lot of trying to hide from death, a lot of trying to hide from impermanence. Every movie that we see seems to say everyone ends up happy and then we roll the credits. That's all of the romantic comedies. It doesn't ever flash forward until the divorce or the fights or whatever. It's we have a makeup industry, which really is sort of an interesting example. Nothing against anyone who works in the makeup industry, but here we're saying, oh, there is... if you don't look old enough, we have a product that's going to make you look the age that you want to look. And if you look too old, then we have a product that's going to make you look younger so that you don't have to look old. It's like never okay for you to actually look the way you look, to be who you are. We actually have we have places for people that get old, that are not their homes. We have old age homes, places that we shunt people who get older so that they could, receive the care that they need. But also there's some sense of like barrier that often takes place, that we don't always nurture the people who are older in our society. So it's like our society's gotten really good at looking at aging and impermanence and death and saying, well, I don't want to deal with that. I want to manicure death. I want to manicure aging. I want to I don't want it to be in my face. I don't want it to look real. I want to have the closed coffin. I don't want to know that the person's actually in there. Like this whole, not that there's anything wrong with that either, but you understand what I'm saying here, that there's a fabric to our society that's trying to actively ignore the truth of impermanence and death. It's not a great way. It often ends up, when we do get fully exposed to these deaths, either big D or little d, it's quite shocking for us. We have the same level of shock that the Buddha had. We know that things are impermanent. We know that death is real. So why are we actively participating in trying to hide it? It might be helpful for us to just do a short contemplation at this point. I've gone on for quite some time. I'd love us to practice together. So whatever it means for you to get into the body, you might notice I have the wiggles, so I'm like letting the body settle a little bit. And then actually, if you're sitting cross-legged on the floor like me, you could let the knees drop a little bit below the hips. That actually will make sure that they don't immediately fall asleep. If you're on a chair, just place your feet firmly on the ground about hips width apart, gently lifting up through the spine. We have guided recordings as part of this online subscription, so you can learn much more about the technique and the posture and all of that. But from now, I just want to do a very light contemplation, relaxing the muscles, taking a breath. Letting each breath ground you in the present moment. So I'm going to read a version of what are known as the Buddha's Five Remembrances, which are offered by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master, in his Plum Village chant book. And as I read this, just let the words wash over you. Notice what comes up in response, and come back to the words as the object of our meditation. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. Noticing how you're feeling in this moment. However you're feeling is fine, but just take a moment to look, to explore. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes or raise your gaze, relax the body, transition out of this very short contemplation. So these are known as the Five Remembrances from the Buddha. And this particular translation, again, is from Thich Nhat Hanh. It comes from the Plum Village Chant Book. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. The truth of aging. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. The nature of sickness. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. The truth of death. The fourth is all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. This is the death of others, impermanence and death. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. And we'll be getting much more into our activity, our actions of body, speech, and mind next video, as we talk about karma and samsara. This is the very nature of things. But let's talk about this for a minute. Let's unpack this, because impermanence is the idea that everything is impermanent. Means that we actually can't rely on external factors for our everlasting happiness. It's just the job that we're seeking, the romantic relationship. If we just get the right person, then we'll forever be happy. The eye product. It's like if I get that new car, that new device, then I'll be happy. We're always delaying our happiness. Well, when I get that thing, when I check this box off my list, then I will be happy. If we do get that thing, that eye product, that car, that job, that relationship, lo and behold, we long for something new. Okay, great, I got that car. Now, you know what I really need is a better house. But as we go along this sort of constant yearning, meanwhile, the car breaks down. And we're annoyed that we have to pour so much money into the car. The product, the eye product, is outdated in a year. The house needs repairs. Clinging to these things actually bring us suffering. So this is the first and second of what are known as the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. The first thing that the Buddha ever taught was, hey, there's suffering. There's dissatisfaction. There's many ways of translating this. There's discomfort. And that's just a part of life. That sense that like, oh yeah, the car's going to break down, the house can break down, everything up to there is aging, birth, the pains of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Those are all very real things that are happening to literally every human being. No human being will not die, right? This is like the old saying is like, well, if the Buddha died, then what hope do we have, right? Like even the guy that got enlightened went ahead and died. So there is no escape from these basic truths. And this leads to the second of the Four Noble Truths, which is the root of our suffering or our pain is that we're constantly craving for there to be another now. There to be something different. That sense of, well, now that I've got the car, I want the house. Now that I've figured out my house, I want the perfect relationship. Now that I've got the perfect relationship, I want a family. Like that sense of always wanting more. That we're always craving more. And that we're ignorant to these basic things, which is like, hey, those things are impermanent. That those things are going to break down. Those people are going to die. This is the nature of things. So that sense of the truth of ignorance is how it's often referred to as the second noble truth. Because we are so ignorant to the nature of reality, we are always craving for these external things, hoping that they will make us happy. The third noble truth, by the way, is the good news truth, which is we don't have to suffer. We don't have to constantly perpetuate this like ignorance and this craving. And the fourth noble truth is, well, here's how we do it. The Eightfold Path and all of the teachings that the Buddha taught from then on mindfulness and compassion, bringing meditation into our lives so that we could actually start to wake up to the reality of what is going on right now. The sense of waking up that we'll be talking about in the months ahead. So this is the truth of impermanence and then death. Yes, there's our death, but there's the death of the job when we get fired or we quit or we retire, the death of the relationship. I have a dear friend, Susan Piver, who's also a wonderful meditation teacher. She's excellent. You should check out her books. Our most recent one is The Four Noble Truths of Love, which I'm a huge fan of. Anyway, she and I often talk about, like, we try and strategize around samsara and, like, the cycle of suffering. And we joke about it. And we were talking a little while back about maybe the best case scenario is that we board one plane, we being like me, Lodro Rinzler, board one plane, and it takes off right at the same time as all of my loved ones and everyone I care about in the world board another, and they take off, and both planes go down simultaneously in very quick deaths, and that's probably gonna create the least amount of suffering for myself and also for all the people I care about. They don't have to mourn me, they don't know I went down, I don't have to mourn them, I don't know when they went down, it's simultaneous, I wasn't even present for it. This is the best I can come up with the truth of death. But it's really morbid to start our series with this, but it's true, like there's everything we know and everyone we encounter has some form of death coming. So not shying away from this is actually a big part of the path. Realizing that death is real actually allows us to make the most of our life. We don't know when death will come, but we know that we are here right now. Today, we have choices we could make. Today, we can make a difference in our life and in the lives of the people we care about. So knowing that death is real, actually wakes us up and keeps us out of this lethargy and sloth that we get into around, I can call it in today, I just got to get through work and then I can watch some TV. It's like, no, I've got to show up. I got to practice mindfulness. I got to be present. I got to practice compassion. I have to show up with an open heart for everyone I encounter. So even just contemplating death in the way that we did can help wake us up to the preciousness of our human life, which is, I did them out of order here, of course, 2 and then 1. So if you remember, we're going through the 4 preliminaries: human life, death, karma, samsara. Latter 2 we'll get to next time, but we started with death. Now we're moving into number 1, which is the preciousness of our human existence. Our human existence, there's many ways that it's precious. In a very traditional sense, it's said that there are many realms that we could be born into in the Buddhist canon. There's the hell realm, and the hungry ghost realm, and the animal realm, and the human realm, and the jealous god realm, and the god realm. All of those are wonderful things that are part of samsara. In the Buddhist immersion series I run every year, it's a 5-month intensive, and we get into these 6 realms and what it means and all of that. But for now, I'll just say, it's said that if you believe, let me put it this way, if you believe in rebirth in multiple lifetimes, great. And if you don't, that's okay. I'm agnostic, if I'm being fully honest. Everything that I've experienced in the Buddhist path, except for this one thing, I've been able to be like, oh yeah, I can prove this in my own experience. I can prove, some of the basic concepts of Buddhism because I've actually lived it. It's hard for me to do rebirth and the 6 realms because I don't remember being born in any of the other realms other than this human one. So that's why I say I'm agnostic. There's the traditional teachings around the 6 realms, and in those it says that it's incredibly, incredibly rare for us to be born into this human realm. How rare? If you imagined the entire world was covered in ocean, and there was a blind tortoise that lived in this world of ocean. And this blind tortoise only came up once every 500 years to the surface of the ocean to take one breath and then went back down. Simultaneous to this, there is what they call a yoke. It's essentially the size of a hula hoop, maybe a little smaller, floating on the top of that surface of the ocean. And the odds of this turtle at some point poking its head up to take that one breath once every 500 years and its head surfacing through the surface of that particular yoke or hula hoop, depending how you like to think about it, it's more likely for that to occur than for us to attain a precious human life. That is the way that these things are often talked about. So that's one way to do it in a very traditional sense. I want to also just offer us very practically, the preciousness of our human life. Yes, if you believe in the multiple lifetimes thing, great. If you don't, again, that's okay. I'm agnostic. We can set that aside for 1 minute, because the preciousness idea here is in this particular lifetime, we have the ability to wake up. We have the causes and conditions that have come together for us to be here together and to meditate together. That's incredibly precious. There are many places and many types of beings that we could have been born as. I could have been born as a jungle cat. I could have been born as an ant. I could have been born in a war-torn country as a person. And it would be much harder for me to practice the Dharma, to practice the teachings of the Buddha and try to wake myself up. So that's one way that this life is precious. It's also precious because of our basic faculties. I can hear, I can see, I can get around, I can walk still. I have the ability to connect with you. These are all incredibly precious resources. So I'm always motivated when I reflect on death and the preciousness of this human life to try to do the best I can, which is not to say we always live, flawless lives. Quite the opposite. I have written in many of my books that if there is a mistake to be made in the spiritual path, I've probably made it. And I've learned from it. That's the other part. So could we actually use our life as this grand experiment to learn how best to be mindful and compassionate? And actually really appreciate the time that we do have to do these sorts of things. I've gone on for quite some time, but maybe as a bit of homework, you could contemplate when you wake up in the morning, how would you like to show up that day? What qualities would you like to cultivate? I often find this is a really helpful way to turn my mind to the Dharma right off the bat. The moment I wake up, sometimes I'll start actually by doing a little bit of gratitude practice. Sometimes people are like, gratitude practice, that's hokey, I get it. But 5 things I'm grateful for, it's often like my wife, my animals, my health, that I have a roof over my head. Very basic things. But if you like that, you can. But what I'm talking about here is transitioning from that into, or instead of doing that, contemplating how would I like to show up for my day? What qualities would I like to cultivate? Sometimes when you wake up, you already have a list of things in your head. Oh, I've got to do that. I've got this meeting. Oh, that's going to be a difficult conversation. How would I like to show up for any of that? What qualities would I like to cultivate in my day? Is it patience? Is it presence? Is it love? And starting to turn our mind in that direction actually allows us to take advantage of the preciousness of this human life. So turning our mind to impermanence and death and this precious opportunity gives us the motivation to live a life of meaning. No one wants to wake up and stare at their phone all day and space out. I don't believe that. So we need to actively turn our mind toward the beneficial ways we want to live our life, in order to rouse ourselves out of the habitual, not so helpful ways of being. There is a saying that you might spot at many Zen temples, and it goes, "Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Awaken, take heed. Do not squander your life." How do we start? With meditation. Thank you for your time and your attention. I'm so deeply grateful we get to go on this journey together, and I look forward to connecting with you again very soon.